Hello, and welcome to Real Cheating Story. I rushed out of my house as fast as my legs would carry me, taking short, quick steps. I ran down the stairs of my porch, trying to make it to the grassy area, but I knew I wouldn't. By the time I reached the sidewalk, it was too late. I couldn't hold it back anymore. It was coming out fast and hard, and I was left with no choice. I stopped where I was, bent over, and placed my hands on my knees for leverage, then violently vomited. It wasn't just the Whopper and fries on the pavement, nor was it the milkshake. There was so much more. Intermingled with the regurgitated food were the pain I'd endured and the bile I had to swallow. The realization of what my life had become was too much for me. Laying there in the multicolored vomit was my marriage, all 10 years of it. Behind me, I heard footsteps coming from the house. Unlike my heavy footsteps, these were lighter and barefoot. The patter of naked feet on the hard ground followed me until they were right next to me. "Artie, please," I heard, as a slender arm wrapped around me. I violently shook it off as I stumbled backward toward my car. "Get away from me, Paige," I yelled, spit flying from my mouth. I fumbled around in my pocket for my keys, cursing the hand that refused to work properly. It was jittery and uncontrollable, like that claw machine at the mall. The one that feebly tries to grab teddy bears for the lucky kid who only had to pay 25 cents. When I finally grabbed my keys, I pressed the button on the remote to unlock the doors. "Artie, stop, please. Let's go back in the house and talk," she begged. I didn't respond. Instead, I got in the car and closed the door, cutting her off. I drowned her out by starting the ignition and stepping on the gas. The roar of the engine made her cries inaudible. Before I sped off with a tire-screeching commotion, I took one last look at my wife. There she stood, only clothed in a bathrobe, her arms loosely crossed over her chest as if she were hugging herself. Her hair was wet and disheveled, but the worried look on her face wasn't enough to make me forget what I'd seen 5 minutes ago. As we locked eyes, I saw something, or rather, I saw an absence of something. Even through her worry and concern for me, I saw nothing. No love, no respect. Her half-hearted begging for me to come back in was just a series of empty words, things she was expected to say in this situation. She wasn't really trying to stop me from leaving. She wasn't frantically banging on my window, protesting her love. She didn't even throw out the cliché, "It's not what it looks like." Her surface-level concern was just a show, nothing more. She didn't love me. She hadn't for some time. That realization was more crushing than anything else, more devastating than the sight of her with her lover in the shower just minutes ago. I pulled off, leaving my ambivalent wife on the sidewalk. Before she disappeared from my rearview mirror, I saw her shake her head and turn back toward the house. "Art, you okay? What the hell is wrong with you?" My brother's voice jolted me. I didn't even answer him. I pushed past him and walked into his apartment without asking if it was okay. He didn't object. He just looked at me with curiosity as he closed the door behind me. I flopped down on his couch like all the energy had been drained from my body. Lance walked slowly over to the armchair next to the couch and sat down, his eyes never leaving me. I took a quick, judgmental scan of his apartment, as I always did when I came over. I couldn't help it. The haphazard way he lived bothered me. There were discarded clothes strewn around, piles of dirty dishes in the sink right next to an empty dishwasher, and a trash can overflowing with garbage. It always disgusted me. In front of the chair he now sat in, a PS4 controller lay on the floor. The TV showed a paused basketball video game, confirming that he had been playing just before answering the door. An open bag of Cheetos and a half-empty 2-liter bottle of Mountain Dew lay nearby. What grown man plays video games at 1 o'clock in the afternoon? My twin brother. That's who. I'm older than Lance by 2 minutes. My name is Arthur McCormick. Some of you may have noticed something about our names, Arthur and Lance. Yes, our parents had a sense of humor. I don't know what they expected when they chose these names for us. It felt like we were destined to be at each other's throats. I'm just glad we didn't have a sister, because her name would have probably been Gwen. "Everything okay, bro?" he asked again, nudging my leg. I still didn't answer. After waiting a few minutes, he gave up with a shrug and unpaused his game. The sounds of screeching sneakers and sports announcers filled the room. Aren't you supposed to be at work? I asked accusingly, ignoring his question. Without looking away from his game, he scoffed. Aren't you? Watching him, my anger grew. The amount of focus he put into something so meaningless irritated me. How could he sit there in basketball shorts and a tank top while the rest of the world worked? Sure, he had a job, but it seemed so trivial he could call off whenever he wanted. Why was he able to breeze through life, carefree, while I was stuck in a storm of frustration? Can you turn that off? What are you, 16? I bellowed unexpectedly. The outburst was so uncalled for. It even surprised me. Lance looked a little taken aback, but didn't really flinch. His fingers barely slowed as they worked the controller. In typical Lance fashion, he shrugged it off with a shake of his head and rolled his eyes. What the hell crawled up your butt and died? He asked offhandedly, still focused on the TV. His indifference infuriated me. Nothing seemed to matter to him. Nothing bothered him. He was impervious to life's challenges. My anger reached a boiling point, and something came over me. I can't explain it. It was a sudden, uncontrollable urge to lash out. I just wanted someone to feel what I was feeling, white-hot anger. Unfortunately for Lance, he was the closest target. Without warning, I jumped up and grabbed the controller from his hands. Before I even realized what I was doing, I threw it across the room. It sailed into the kitchen, crashing against the wall and shattering into pieces. What the hell, Art? Lance yelled in disbelief. What's wrong with you? You're what's wrong with me. I shouted, jabbing my finger into his chest. If you've got a problem with me, feel free to leave, asshole. This is my apartment. Take your fat butt home to your wife. My brain snapped. That's the only way I can describe it. With an animalistic growl, I rushed at him. Lance and I had fought many times before, but this felt different. Unfortunately, despite being my twin brother, he was always bigger, stronger, and faster. He was taller by about 4 inches. That's why he played football and I didn't. So, of course, he easily overpowered me, throwing me to the floor with little effort. Common sense should have told me to calm down, but when you're fueled by rage, rational thought disappears. All I knew was that someone had to feel pain. Fueled by anger, I got up and attacked again, this time swinging at him. He dodged me easily, and the next thing I knew, his fist slammed into me, sending me reeling. When I came to, the throbbing in my head was intense. Groaning, I opened my eyes, memories flooding back. My brother had knocked me out. I gingerly sat up and realized I was on the couch. Lance must have put me there after the fight. No doubt, I'd hit the floor hard. I heard a voice in the background. It was Lance, distorted at first but becoming clearer. No, you don't understand. I know we always fight, but this time was different. He actually swung at me. He tried to hit me. I turned slowly to see him in the kitchen, on his cell phone. While he talked, he was rummaging through the freezer. When he noticed I was awake, he scowled, then smirked and said into the phone, "What do you think I did? I knocked his butt out. Now come get your husband before I have to kill him." With that, he hung up, placed the phone on the counter, and walked over, handing me a rag filled with ice. "You done acting like an idiot?" he asked. "Why did you call Paige?" I groaned, ignoring his rhetorical question. "Because she's your wife, genius. She's your problem." I shook my head and pressed the ice pack to my head. "Call her back. Tell her I left. Tell her I died. I don't care. I just can't talk to her right now." His face turned serious. "What the hell is going on with you, Art? You come over here and take a swing at me. What the hell?" "Like you care," I muttered. He scoffed dismissively. "You came over here and jumped on me. Your problem is now my problem. So either tell me what's going on or go home and deal with it." As much as I hated to admit it, he was right. I owed him an explanation for my bizarre behavior. Over the next 5 minutes, I explained everything. How I wasn't feeling well after eating some questionable fast food, how my work could have been done from home, and then the unexpected turn of events that led to the discovery of my marriage's demise. I didn't expect Paige to be home, but when I got there, I found her with someone else. Walking into that scene had been a gut-wrenching shock. To my surprise, Lance didn't laugh. His expression grew more pensive as I spoke. When I finished, He shook his head angrily and muttered, "That's messed up. Screw her." I chuckled bitterly and replied, "Funny, that's exactly what the other guy was doing." Lance ignored my joke, pacing back and forth in frustration. "Who's the guy? Is it someone we know?" Then he stopped, a sudden thought crossing his mind. "Goddamn it, Art, tell me it's not Brian. That snake's always had his eye on Paige." "No, it's not Brian," I said. "Besides, after what the last guy did to him for messing with his wife, I don't think he'll be getting involved with any married women anytime soon. I don't know who this guy was. He looked familiar, but I can't place him." This was exactly what I needed. Someone to share my anger, no judgment, no advice, just someone on my side. Lance and I didn't always get along, but at the end of the day, we were brothers. We were allowed to mess with each other, but no one else could. A knock at the door interrupted us. We exchanged a knowing look as Lance got up to answer it. I heard Paige's voice asking about me. "He left," Lance said abruptly, his tone flat and rude. "But you called me and told me," she started. "He left," Lance repeated, cutting her off, his voice dripping with disgust. After a pause, he pointedly told her to go before slamming the door in her face. When he returned, he sat down without saying a word. I gave him a small smile of gratitude. He nodded in acknowledgement, picked up another controller, and continued playing his game. Nothing more needed to be said. Later in the evening, I knew I couldn't avoid Paige forever. Eventually, I would have to confront her, but my procrastination was my way of holding on to the last remnants of my life before everything shattered. Once I went home, the end of my marriage would become real. There would be questions, answers, and decisions. And undoubtedly, there would be a lot of swearing and shouting. That's just how it goes when infidelity is involved. After hours of sitting in silence, watching Lance play his game, I finally told him I was heading out. He walked me to the door. "You good?" he asked, concern clear on his face. "Not really," I admitted, "but I'm not going to do anything stupid." He nodded and gave me a quick hug. "Good luck, bro," he said as he opened the door. I drove home in heavy silence, the only sound the passing cars and my own chaotic thoughts. Cheating. Me. How could she do this? I kept asking myself. My brain struggled to make sense of it all, grasping for any explanation, but every time I thought I had one, I dismissed it. The reality, that she just didn't love me anymore, was too much to handle. When I pulled into my driveway next to Paige's car, everything looked so normal. So much so that I could have almost fooled myself into thinking it was all a dream. But it wasn't. It was real. My mind replayed the entire afternoon frame by frame. I was overwhelmed by it all. Yet the image that stuck with me wasn't the chaos in the bathroom, but rather the scene outside. Paige's lackluster attempt to get me inside, and the half-hearted consolation told me there was a problem I had missed. Maybe it wasn't really apathy, but that's how it seemed to me. There was a definite lack of urgency. When someone is about to lose something precious, they usually show some kind of desperation. Paige's voice sounded more like she was trying to convince me to let her mother stay for the weekend than begging me to forgive her. Wasn't I worth more than that? A real plea for forgiveness? I looked up and saw a silhouette in the window. It was too tall to be our kids, Josh and Ally. I assumed it had to be Paige. At least, I hoped it was. A part of me thought, maybe it was someone else, but that was just my bitterness speaking. I sighed, opened the door, and stepped out of the car. With heavy steps, I made my way to the house. I glanced back at the window, and our eyes met for a moment before I opened the door and walked in. "Your brother is so rude," she said in a lifeless voice as I shut the door behind me. She didn't even turn around. "Well, I'd think it's ruder to betray someone while they're at work," I responded. I was secretly satisfied when she flinched at my words. I didn't see her face, but I hoped it showed some hurt, maybe even a tear. But probably not. That would require caring. After an awkward pause, I headed upstairs. I had so much to say, but I didn't know where to begin. Luckily, she broke the silence, even if it was with the most obvious statement ever. "We should talk." I sighed loudly but said nothing. Half of me didn't want to do this, but the other half needed to. She turned around, and when her eyes landed on my bruised face, they softened. She reached out to touch me, but I backed away, shaking my head. That gesture was too familiar, too caring, and both were unacceptable right now. She sighed and walked past me into the living room. Reluctantly, I followed. We sat on opposite sides of the room, and a heavy silence settled between us. I broke it first. "Where are the kids?" "At my sister's," she replied, keeping things casual. I nodded, tapping my foot nervously. "Okay, Paige," I said when it was time to confront what really needed to be said. "You wanted to talk, so talk." Put on the spot, she seemed thrown off, stammering a bit. She looked away, gathering herself. "I just wanted to start by saying I'm sorry. You didn't deserve to find out that way. I know you're angry, and I deserve that." What was that? Was that supposed to be an apology? Not for what she had done, but for how I found out about it. Was that supposed to make me feel better? "I guess that's my fault," I said sarcastically. "I thought you were at work. If I'd known you were busy, I would have been more courteous. Maybe called you first, so you could have some warning." She shook her head. "That's not what I meant, and you know it." "No, of course not," I retorted. "What you meant to say was, Artie, I'm so sorry for everything. It was a terrible thing to do." I mimicked her voice, dripping with sarcasm. "I mean, that's what any other person would say." She glared at me. "First off," she said, her voice tinged with irritation, "this is our house. I pay bills just as much as you do. Secondly, you're twisting my words." I couldn't help but chuckle, though nothing was funny. "Wow, you get caught, and the first thing you want to do is argue over bills?" I could see her trying to come up with a response, but before she could, I jumped back in. "For the record, I'm not twisting your words around. I hear what you're saying, but I also hear what you're not saying. So why don't we try this? Drop the I'm sorry act. Be real with me and stop with the half-hearted apologies." She shook her head sadly. "Believe what you want, Artie, but I am sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." I felt my face twist with skepticism. "Really? You didn't think this would hurt me? Tell me, what exactly are you sorry for? Because you haven't apologized for betraying me, for throwing our marriage away, or for being with someone else. So what exactly are you sorry for?" "I already told you, you're just not listening." "Whatever," I said, dismissing her with a wave of my hand. We sat in awkward silence for a moment before another question came to mind. "How long has it been since we were together?" "Really together? What does that have to do with anything?" she asked, though her face betrayed her. She knew where I was going with this. "I can't remember the last time we were close like that, when it was spontaneous. It's more like you were doing me a favor, or rewarding me for something. But him, that guy gets enthusiasm?" My voice rose with anger as I thought about the situation in ways I hadn't considered before. Disgust filled my voice as I asked, "How much more were you giving him than me?" She looked at me with irritation. "I'm not answering that." I ignored her. By my count it was, what? Twice a month? Maybe? "You're being childish," she said with contempt. "And you're a—" I spat back, venom in my words. She met my eyes for a moment before turning away, clearly angered. She hated being called names, especially that one. "Calling me names isn't going to get us anywhere," she said in a measured tone. It was the voice she used when someone was frustrating her, but she was trying to stay calm. "Neither is dodging questions. Those aren't questions. You just want to provoke me." She was right. I wanted her to feel something: anger, guilt, regret, anything close to what I was feeling. But no matter what I said, I knew she couldn't feel that. She couldn't, because I hadn't done the same to her. Like the good husband, I had stayed true. Silence hung between us for a few seconds before I asked the question I really needed answered. "Do you still love me, Paige?" There was a long pause. That pause was worth 1,000 words, louder than anything she could have said. "Yes, I do. I'll always love you. Just not in that way. Not anymore." I struggled to process what that meant. What other way was there to love a spouse? I always thought the answer to that question was a simple yes or no. In my mind, if it wasn't an immediate and definite yes, then it was a no. Earlier, I had thought she didn't love me. Now I knew for sure. I couldn't do this. Not now, not this way. I stood up from the couch, drained of energy. Unfortunately, I had to pass by her to leave. She seized the opportunity to grab my hand. Please don't run away. We have to finish this. It's been a long time coming. I pulled my hand away and glared at her. What else is there to say? You don't love me. Nothing else matters. That's not what I said, and you know it, she replied defensively. I understand you're hurt, and I regret what I've done. But you're twisting everything I say. I sneered. How nice of you to understand what I'm going through. So, tell me, when did you stop loving me? Was it before or after you started seeing someone else? Because I don't recall you ever mentioning it to me. I added sarcastically, using air quotes around stop loving me. She narrowed her eyes at me. There you go again. Being a jerk isn't going to make this easier. My bad, Paige. I'm sorry, really, I replied mockingly. I didn't realize how hard this was for you. She started to respond but stopped. My cynicism was wearing down her attempt at being civil. Finally, she dropped the pretense. You know what, Artie? You're right. I should stop apologizing. You'll believe whatever you want and twist everything I say. I couldn't help getting in one last jab. So, was this you trying to spare my feelings? That was the last straw. The apologetic look on her face disappeared. Irritation took over, then transformed into an arrogant smirk. She laughed coldly. Yes, I was trying to spare your feelings. I wasn't going to tell you that you're a boring, overweight man whose idea of romance is 2 minutes of effort. I wasn't going to remind you that the last time we did anything fun or spontaneous was before I was pregnant. And no, I definitely wasn't going to mention that your sad attempts at intimacy are barely 5 minutes of half-hearted effort. Her words hit their mark. I know I had asked for the truth, but I didn't realize how brutal it would be. The fact that she delivered it so destructively only made it worse. So, like anyone under attack, I retaliated. Well, when your wife just lies there like she's not even interested, what kind of romance do you expect? I shot back. She just smirked, as if my words hadn't struck deep enough. Then she delivered her final blow, the one that hurt the most. Why do you think I just lie there like that, huh? You think you can just jump into a cold car in the middle of winter and drive off? She laughed, shaking her head with a smug look in her eye. A girl needs something to work with. If you really saw me with Derek, you'd have seen what kind of woman I can be, with a man who actually knows what he's doing. Boom. That was the sound of my pride and heart hitting the floor. Her words echoed in my mind. There was no comeback to that. No words left that could salvage my dignity. She had struck a blow so deep that I was left speechless, standing there in disbelief. I don't know what my face looked like, but it must have been bad because her anger disappeared in an instant, replaced by a look of horror. God, Artie, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to come out like that, she stammered, her voice now filled with regret. I couldn't hear the rest, whether she continued apologizing or stopped mid-sentence. By the time she started backtracking, I was already leaving the room. The next morning, I woke up with a start. My alarm hadn't gone off like it usually did. I looked over to where the clock should have been, only to realize I wasn't in my comfortable king-sized bed. I was in the guest room, sleeping on a twin bed with a thin, uncomfortable mattress. My body felt the stiffness, the soreness, as if it was reminding me that I was late for work. I sat up, stretched, and winced as my back punished me for not having the sense to at least sleep on the couch. When I got out of bed and glanced at the mirror above the dresser, I groaned. The reflection showed a man, haphazardly dressed in the wrinkled clothes he wore the day before. Boring, overweight man echoed in my head as I stared at my own image. I lifted my shirt, took a deep breath, and sucked in my stomach. It didn't look so bad. Or so I thought until I exhaled, letting my stomach fall back into its natural state. It sagged over my belt, making me wonder when I had let myself go like this. The memory of last night's argument resurfaced, and I felt that familiar sting again. Paige's hurtful words replayed in my mind, and I found myself unable to look at the man in the mirror. That loser. So much so that his wife had to go behind his back to find someone else. I trudged to the main bathroom. After a quick knock to make sure Ally wasn't in there, I opened the door and went inside. I went through my morning routine, carefully avoiding the mirror over the sink, and got ready for another day. Before everything went wrong, I had thought my life was pretty good. I stayed with Walmart after graduating with my degree in business management, and after 18 years, I was a district manager responsible for several stores. My job wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and it paid well. With both of our salaries combined, Paige and I cleared over $200,000 a year. We had everything we thought we wanted. A nice house, 2 new cars, and our kids in private schools. Even with our full-time jobs, we made time for the kids. Paige made sure she was home early to cook for the family, and we alternated driving Josh and Ally to their various activities. Josh played soccer, and Ally was always having sleepovers with her best friend. Keeping up with their needs required both of us. It felt like the American dream. At least, that's what I thought. But apparently, it wasn't enough for Paige. She wanted something I wasn't capable of giving her. She wanted someone else. After finishing in the bathroom, I stepped out without paying much attention. Paige was walking quickly down the hall, probably heading to Josh's room to wake him up again. He often rolled over and went back to sleep after the first wake-up call. My kids reminded me of Lance and myself, Ally, the responsible one like me, and Josh, the charmer like Lance. The two of us practically ran into each other. Paige was light on her feet, expertly dodging me and avoiding the collision. We awkwardly apologized as we sidestepped each other, like two strangers bumping into each other on the street. Then we stood there, an uncomfortable silence hanging between us. I have to get Josh up, she finally stammered. Okay, was my brilliant response. Then we turned in opposite directions, putting some distance between us. I had never been as relieved to drive to work as I was that morning. I just needed to get out of the house. Once I was safely behind my desk, I tried to push thoughts of Paige aside. As long as I was focused on a task, I was fine. But when there were a few minutes of downtime, my mind drifted back to her and him. That image of her in the shower with someone else kept replaying, freezing in my mind as a reminder of everything I lacked. Nothing makes a man feel smaller than knowing his wife desires someone else enough to betray their marriage. Her words echoed in my head. If you really saw me and Derek, you'd know what kind of woman I am when I'm with a man who knows what he's doing. I couldn't ignore that statement. With him, she was adventurous, spontaneous, and more open than she ever was with me. Even in that brief moment, I saw how different she was. Whatever he gave her, I clearly couldn't. I couldn't deny it. The evidence was right there in front of me. My phone vibrated. I fished it out and saw a text from Paige. I groaned as I read it. Last night got out of hand. We need to talk without the pettiness. The anger rose in me again. Pettiness? Did she really type that? Is that how she saw last night? I didn't lash out, though. There wasn't any point. I simply replied, agreed. We'll talk tonight. A few moments later, she sent back, okay, see you then. I checked the time on my phone and put it away. It was almost time to head out for a store visit. One of my locations needed a walkthrough. It was my problem child, the store with low sales, high theft, and constant incidents. These issues weren't due to poor management or a lazy staff. It was the location, right in the middle of a low-income area. Many people hate talking about the impact of location, as if acknowledging it makes you some sort of villain. But the truth is, this particular Walmart closed at midnight while others were open 24/7 because of the higher risk here. More thefts, more incidents. It wasn't a judgment, it was a fact. I drove to the store and met up with the manager, Phil. Despite the challenges of this location, I liked Phil. He was one of my favorite managers, young, in his early 30s, but incredibly motivated. He didn't settle for mediocrity and worked hard to improve things, even when the odds were stacked against him. He was more successful than many of his predecessors, though I believe the area limited his potential. When I arrived, I found him in his office, working on his computer and on the phone. He greeted me warmly, shaking my hand with a smile. After some small talk, he led me through each department. I spoke with the department managers, assessed their performance, and did a light inspection for any issues that needed attention. Back in Phil's office, I watched him work for a moment. He didn't look like the typical store manager. His youth was part of it, but there was something else. He was fit, his chest and shoulders broad, his stomach flat, making his shirt and tie hang on him neatly. I know it sounds strange, but I couldn't help it. My mind kept going back to Paige's harsh words. You're a boring, overweight man who can't even be spontaneous anymore. Without thinking, I asked, "Phil, do you mind if I ask you a personal question?" "Not at all," he said, looking curious. There was no way to ask this without it sounding weird, so I just went for it. "You seem like you spend a lot of time at the gym. How do you find the time?" I expected him to look uncomfortable, but he didn't. "You're not the first person to ask me that, Arthur. Honestly, it's not as hard as people make it out to be. Being healthy isn't some unattainable goal." I chuckled. "You gym people always make it sound so easy." "No, it's true," he said, pausing for a moment as if gathering his thoughts. "Mind if I ask you a couple of personal questions?" I wasn't sure where this conversation was heading, but I nodded. "Sure, go ahead. When you get off work, what do you do?" he asked. I thought about it. I knew where he was going with this, so I started mentally listing reasons to justify my habits. "I work anywhere from 9 to 12 hours a day. By the time I get home, I'm completely exhausted. All I can do is grab some dinner and sit down to rest." Phil nodded thoughtfully. "What do you usually eat?" I thought about it, trying to frame it in a positive light. "My wife cooks pretty healthy meals most of the time. You know, vegetables, baked chicken, fish, rice, stuff like that." I made sure to mention the vegetables first. Phil nodded again. "And what do you eat when she doesn't cook?" "Well, those are the days I eat out. But they aren't often," I admitted, glossing over the truth. Yes, Paige did cook healthy meals, but that didn't stop me from enjoying a donut or fast food when she wasn't around. Still, I wasn't about to confess all that. Phil seemed to sense it, but he didn't push. He just reached into his desk and pulled out a card. "I used to work at this gym before I came to Walmart. Great staff, excellent trainers. In fact, the woman who manages it now was a trainer when I worked there. You should check it out sometime. Someone there could help you make some changes if you're interested." I took the card and glanced at it. The gym logo stood out, with contact information underneath. "The manager's name is Naomi," he added. "If you ever decide to go, tell her Phil sent you." As I drove home, I thought about Phil's questions. They lingered in my mind, and so did my real answers to them, the ones I hadn't said out loud. When I pulled into the driveway, I stuffed the card in my wallet, bracing myself for what was likely going to be the most difficult conversation of my life. When I walked into the house, I found Paige sitting in the living room. The TV was on, but she didn't seem interested in it. "Where are the kids?" I asked, noticing how quiet it was. "I sent them to my sister's again. 2 days in a row." No doubt she suspected something was wrong. "Yeah, well, better that than having them hear any more of our conversations." I forced myself to let it go. I sat down across from her, and we sat in silence for a few moments, the clock ticking away. I finally broke the silence with the question that had been burning in my mind. "Why, Paige?" The weight of those 2 words hung in the air, thick with emotion. She blinked, trying to stop the tears from falling. But one slipped down her cheek anyway. "Because I'm not attracted to you anymore," she said softly, as though she hated to admit it. "I just don't feel the same way." I don't know why I asked. I already knew this. She had said it before. But hearing it again was like tearing open a fresh wound. "So, you stopped loving me because I've put on weight?" I asked, my voice heavy with emotion. Tears streamed down her face now. "It's not just that, Artie. It's everything. We've drifted apart. We barely do anything together anymore. It's always about the kids or bills. And when we are together, it's like there's no spark." I clenched my teeth, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "It doesn't help that I'm not enough for you, in any way." She didn't argue. She just shook her head sadly. "I'm sorry for saying what I did yesterday. I was angry." "Is it true?" I asked, almost hoping for some small chance that it wasn't. But she didn't need to answer. The look on her face said it all. My heart sank again, the sting of rejection fresh as ever. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. "I could have changed. Why did you let me go on for years, thinking everything was fine? Why did you have to betray me? Why, Paige?" She shrugged, wiping her tears. "I tried to tell you, at least in the beginning, but nothing ever changed. After a while, I just gave up. We had a good life, good enough, I guess. The kids were happy, you seemed happy. I didn't think I had a right to complain. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You never told me you were unhappy. Not like that. I would have remembered something like that. But I did tell you, she said, defensive now. I mentioned your weight and how maybe you should try to be healthier. I was stunned. Every wife says that. How was I supposed to know that meant you were unhappy in the marriage? And for the record, I wasn't happy either. I felt like I had a wife who wasn't fully there. I paused, collecting my thoughts. But I didn't put two and two together. I thought marriages just went through rough patches, and I dealt with it. You just dealt with it? She said, her voice rising. That's the problem. You knew something was wrong, and you did nothing. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you try to fix it? You just said that deep down you knew something was wrong. Why didn't you do something about it instead of just dealing with it? I questioned sharply. I wasn't going to let her misdirect blame onto me. So, that gives you the right to cheat? Yes, I thought something was wrong, but I wasn't the one cheating. You were. I didn't use a stale marriage as an excuse to seek someone else. You were the one who felt enough discontent to go outside the marriage. You were the one who found me boring, fat, and unappealing. That means you had the greater responsibility to say something. Instead, you stood back and let us end up here. She looked like she was on the verge of saying something but then stopped. After a few more seconds of silence, she asked, so what now? I don't know, Paige. I guess I wanted to tell her to go screw herself. I wanted to kick her out, but for some reason, I wasn't able to say the word divorce. That was a word I never thought I'd utter. I don't know, I repeated. She seemed uneasy, her eyes cast down, but I could see something in them. She was figuring out how to tell me something. As she opened her mouth to speak, my heart dropped. I knew what was coming next. I think we should get a divorce, Ree, she said softly, not looking up. The words rang over and over in my head like a church bell. She was right. The logical solution to this dilemma was to cut our losses and move on. That sounds so easy, doesn't it? But that's the problem with marriage. It isn't logical. Nothing about love is. What person goes into a business deal knowing it has a 50% failure rate? No one does. Love and marriage are both emotion-based commitments. Logistics just get in the way. But for her, it was an easy fix. Just split up, easy peasy. I became angry, of course. I was angry about the infidelity, but there was also a juvenile element to it. I was angry that I wasn't the one who suggested we split up. She was the one who cheated. I should have been the one telling her to pack her things and go. Instead, I hesitated. My heart still held a shred of hope, but I should have known that she didn't feel the same way. Her actions said that in spades. Of course you think we should, I said sarcastically. Never mind worrying about how it will affect the twins. No, we need to divorce because you just need something else. Come on, Artie, even you said that you were unhappy. Yeah, but I was about to launch into more reasons why she was absurd in her thinking. But then I realized there was no point. She was done with me, had been for some time. The only thing arguing would accomplish was to make me feel like a loser. I felt like I had to leave that room, to get away from her. The stink of rejection was all over me. This time, when I got up to leave, she didn't stop me. I started to walk out but had one burning question left. I paused at the vestibule leading to the foyer. Who was that guy? I asked without turning around to face her, trying to remain calm. Derek, she replied. His name is Derek. He's a guy I work with. Derek? I repeated in a voice that barely broke a whisper. I think I remember him from that office party 2 years ago. The two of you danced together a lot. She must have read between the lines of what I was saying because her response was almost immediate. We weren't sleeping together then. I promise. A sad scoff escaped my lips. Well, I guess that's something, isn't it? I turned my head just enough to glance at her from the corner of my eye. Were you guys flirting? Something had to be going on. Your interaction was way too friendly to just be colleagues. What does it matter, Artie? She asked sadly. It matters to me. Her eyes rolled as she looked at the ceiling. Fine. I guess you can say that there was a lot of attraction there. Maybe even a little flirting, but it was nothing more than office banter. It wasn't until we met at the gym that things started to become more real. When I responded this time, I wasn't able to hold back my frustration. The gym, of course. You met at the gym, and that made you enthusiastic about ruining your marriage, right? But it was justifiable because I'm a boring guy who can't satisfy his wife. Artie, she whined. But I paid her no attention and continued my rant. He's a great guy who knows what he's doing. Doesn't that turn you into some sort of, isn't that what you told me? She didn't answer. Instead, she repeated her catchphrase, I'm sorry that I said those things to you. I was so sick of hearing her say that. It felt like a slap in the face. I knew it was supposed to be an apology to cover the pain she caused, but it felt hollow. She wasn't truly sorry for what she said. She was sorry for saying it aloud. Those were her real feelings. Her only regret was getting angry enough to drop her guard. I left straight out of the house and into my car, ending up once again at my brother's place. He answered the door, looked at me, and then stepped aside to let me in. You staying over? He asked. I nodded. Without another word, he disappeared into the back of the apartment and returned with a blanket. Thanks, I said as I grabbed it. No problem, he said, walking to his bedroom. Just don't start acting like a child, or I will knock you out again. I spread the blanket out on the couch, got undressed, and went into the bathroom. As I washed my hands, I looked at myself in the mirror and shook my head. Exiting the bathroom, I stretched out on my impromptu bed. What had my life become? How did it turn out this way? I did everything I thought I was supposed to do. I worked hard, honored my wife and family, and never broke the law. Yet here I was, sleeping on my brother's couch as if I were the one who had done something wrong. Darkness loomed over me as I closed my eyes, trying to sleep, but I was unable to. Lance's couch was uncomfortable, but that wasn't the reason for my insomnia. My mind wouldn't shut off. Demons tormented me into the early hours of the morning with visions of my wife and Derek. One would think I kept seeing them together in moments of intimacy, but what I actually saw was the exact opposite. I saw them at the gym, working out together. I saw them at work, joking and laughing with each other. They were sneaking away for moments that felt too close. Their smiles, their flirting, their insipid infatuation. These visions were much worse than anything I could imagine. Did they ever talk about me? That thought stung my heart, making me feel vulnerable. It not only hurt, but directly attacked my pride. Surely, if they did bring me up, it was in comparison to how I stacked up against him. Or rather, how I didn't. Did she tell him how much better he was than me? Did she tell him that his fit body was more appealing than my own? Of course she did. Why wouldn't she? I did manage to catch a few winks of sleep before I heard Lance getting ready for work. A quick glance at my cell phone told me it was a little past 7 when he came out of his room, dressed and ready. I saw him go into the kitchen, grab a spoon from the drawer, and pull a yogurt from the fridge. I didn't think he even knew I was awake until he asked, "You going to work today?" "I don't know. Maybe," I replied. He shook his head and ripped the foil top off the yogurt. After a quick lick of the excess yogurt, he threw it away and stirred the contents of the cup, leaning against the counter as he ate. I thought to myself, does he do anything like an adult? I wanted to say something, but I let it go. It wasn't worth it. Besides, I was staying at his place and had no timetable for when I wouldn't need to. Sleeping on his couch seemed like a better alternative to going home and dealing with my loveless marriage. I didn't want to wear out my welcome just yet. Nothing else was said until he was heading out. I had turned on the TV and was randomly switching channels when he said, "Art, don't let that turn you into some sad loser. I've seen it happen to guys, and it's pathetic. I don't want that for you. You've got to let her go and move on to the next. There are plenty of women out there." He gave me a quick nod, like he had just imparted some timeless wisdom, and then walked out. I found myself sitting there, thinking about what he said. I wasn't reflecting on the wisdom he offered. Instead, I was stunned by how naive he sounded. His arrogant view of my situation made me angry. In his mind, Paige was on the same level as one of his girlfriends of the week. It didn't matter that we had known each other for 12 years and had been married for 10 of them. He didn't see the difference between that and his relationships that never made it to the first anniversary. For him, a breakup meant a brief period of mourning followed by a return to bachelorhood. Then, the cycle would start all over again. I guess life's that easy when you're Lance. How nice it must be to have the world so accommodating. Our existence proved that life is unfair. As kids, everyone went on and on about how handsome he was and how much of a heartbreaker he would be when he reached high school. He was the boy who even had the teachers fanning themselves when he walked by. I wasn't as blessed, despite being his twin. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't ugly. I would have even been considered somewhat handsome if he weren't the one I was constantly compared to. What I lacked in looks, I made up for with hard work. I got my first job as soon as I turned 16, working as a maintenance associate at the McDonald's down the street from my house. Working in fast food was more stressful than it was worth, so I transitioned to Walmart when I turned 17. Being a stocker suited me better than cleaning up after customers. I worked 25 hours a week and still managed to maintain a 3.5 GPA. You'd think my parents would be proud to have a son like this. They should have been bragging to all their friends about my accomplishments. However, my achievements paled in comparison to Lance's. He played football as the running back for our school, scoring more touchdowns than our quarterback. It was almost unfair to have him on our team. His speed, size, and athleticism made him a weapon that our coach utilized in every tough situation. Naturally, this made him incredibly popular. Even when I saved up enough money to buy a car, women flocked to him and ignored me. It got to the point that when he introduced me as his twin brother, people were first surprised that we were related, and then they would snicker at the idea of me being his twin. He even got special treatment at home. Our parents treated him like the favored son. My dad was too busy boasting about his football to show him any discipline. My mom doted on him like he was frozen in time at 5 years old. They were constantly protecting him, as if he were a priceless, fragile piece of art. Anything he did was worthy of a parade in his honor. Meanwhile, I was expected to be the responsible one, doing so with little recognition. Good grades were an absolute must. If I brought home an A in calculus, I got a good job, son. If he scored a touchdown, there would be newspaper clippings littering the house with his picture on them. Thus began our dynamic. I graduated high school and went to college to pursue my undergraduate degree. Walmart treated me well, so I continued working there. I was promoted twice before graduating with my BA in business management. Even with the increased workload, I kept a decent GPA. He was allowed to basically sleep in class and cheat his way through high school, relying on some random smart girl or even an infatuated teacher or two to help him graduate. To further highlight our disparity and how unfair life is, he went to college on a full ride, while I practically owed Sally Mae my firstborn. What did he do with all that opportunity laid at his feet? He lost his scholarship because he partied too hard and got caught with illegal substances. Without that, he had to pay for school, and our parents weren't really in a financial position to support his education. His choices were to take out loans, get a job, or simply drop out. Since football was the only reason he was in college in the first place, he didn't even try to figure out a way to stay. He just gave up and came home. Having a child, flunking out of college, and ruining his free ride would have been a huge disappointment for most parents to deal with, but not mine. They immediately jumped into Operation Save Lance and treated him like he was the victim. It didn't matter that he was the one who messed up. He needed all of us to clean up the mess, and they showed no hesitation in doing it. Now he had a job that my father got him, an apartment that I gave him the deposit for, and a car that my dad co-signed for. No wonder he breezed through life without a care in the world. His carefree days were spent in the gym, playing games, and occasionally going to work. What would he know about being rejected like I was? The cheating aspect was bad enough, but the way she casually tossed aside our marriage was something else. It felt like there was nothing worth fighting for, nothing about me worth loving. I sighed and slumped down into the couch. For the first time since all this started, I allowed the tears to slip down my face. I stayed with my brother for a week, which was about how long it took for us to get so sick of each other that separation became necessary. I was grateful that he let me stay with him. While I could have gone to a hotel, I think I subconsciously needed to be around someone who loved me, even if it was Lance. During that week, I received several texts from Paige asking where I was and if I was coming back. I laughed to myself and casually tossed my phone onto the couch when I got those messages. But then she mentioned that the twins were asking questions that needed to be addressed by both of us. I was willing to ignore her, but I had to face the kids, which meant I had to go back home. I took a day off work so that I could return when the house was empty. I thought it would be better to be there when she and the kids got home to avoid small talk and forced cordiality with her. My plan failed, of course, because I have the worst luck in the world. I pulled into the driveway and mentally groaned when I saw her car already there. Either she picked today of all days to stay home, or she had been home all week. I just couldn't catch a break. I tentatively walked in, honestly unsure of what to expect. I silently prayed to unknown deities to spare me the cruelty of witnessing another episode involving Paige and Derek. I couldn't go through that again without losing control. Someone up there must have heard me because I found her in the bedroom, fully clothed and alone. Thank God. She was pulling clothes out of the closet and throwing them on the bed. I didn't even have to look closely to see that they were my clothes. She was working so hard that she was sweating and slightly out of breath. "You're finally back," she said in a winded voice when she saw me enter the room. She stopped her task and put her hands on her hips. "What are you doing with my clothes?" I asked, alternating between looking at the clothes and her. She let out a small, incredulous laugh. "I wasn't sure you were ever coming home. You ran away without telling me where you were going, then you didn't answer any of my calls or texts, so I was packing your stuff to save you the trouble if you ever decided to pick it up." I shook my head. "You're full of it, Paige. You knew where I was." She rushed at me and poked her finger into my chest. "No, you're full of it," she said angrily. "You run and hide, and leave me here to answer to the kids by myself." I was beside myself. I knew she wasn't trying to make herself the victim of my thoughtlessness. "Please tell me you're joking. I don't want to believe that I married someone who is this detached from reality. There's no way you actually believe that I did you wrong. You do remember why I was gone in the first place, don't you?" She crossed her arms across her chest, but at least she had the decency to look apologetic. Then she took a deep breath and looked away from me. Okay, fine. It's my fault," she admitted in a small voice as she uncrossed her arms and sat on the bed. "I started all of this. You have a right to be angry with me. For what it's worth, I am really sorry. I was wrong for what I did." I was sick of hearing her apologize, but at least this one was better than the previous ones. She was apologizing for her actions, not for how I found out about them. "Did you ever love me?" I asked sincerely. "I know that you didn't in the end, but what about the beginning? We had some good times, didn't we?" There was no bitterness in my voice. It was an honest question. "Yeah, we did, and I did love you. I still do, believe it or not," she answered, a forlorn expression on her face. She didn't say, "Just not that way," but I knew the implication was there. I wanted to ask her more questions, but there was no point. She was through with me, and there was nothing left to salvage. Besides, I didn't need to get my pride beaten down anymore. We stood there in silence, letting the chasm between us widen. I didn't fight it any longer. I gave in to the inevitable. Well, I guess the thing we do now is try to move forward as adults. We have a lot to figure out, so I'll grab these clothes and move them into the guest room, I finally said. She gave a sad nod. I tried to lighten the mood with a joke, adding, "Just so you know, I'm going to buy a new bed to put in there." She chuckled. "Yeah, well, you're the one who bought that uncomfortable bed, remember? Lance was going to stay with us for a little while, and you didn't want him to get too comfy." I had to laugh at the irony, despite myself. Yeah, well, that plan backfired. I saw something in her eyes, but I couldn't figure out what it was. It seemed like she was looking at me, expecting something but not getting it. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was forgiveness. I didn't know. All I knew was that I was trying to get over the former, but was incapable of giving the latter. The only thing I had to give her was cordiality, even if it was fake. The two of us moved my clothes into the other room, silently agreeing to an unspoken ceasefire. We didn't do any more talking than was absolutely necessary for the rest of the afternoon until the twins came home. We existed in a cold but polite atmosphere. She thankfully stepped out to run some errands for a while, and I hung up my clothes in peaceful solitude. It wasn't until we sat the twins down after dinner that the emotional volcano fully erupted. We explained, without really explaining, what was happening between us. Josh and Ally were smart kids. They knew there was something we weren't telling them. Truth be told, I wanted to spill the beans about Paige. I really did, but I saw no point in it. It wouldn't make their pain go away. In fact, it would add to it. Sure, I would have had a few moments of vindication as they turned on their mother, but it would hurt them more in the long run. They were too young to process that information like an adult would, So it was best that they thought this was what happened when mommy and daddy fell out of love. That ate me from the inside out. It killed me not only to have to remain silent in the midst of such betrayal, but also to co-sign it as I watched my kids crumble. It was a weight that was almost too heavy for me to bear. I avoided making eye contact with Paige. I couldn't do it. I wasn't strong enough to look at her, knowing that all of this was her fault, and not lose it. She instinctively knew to stay away from me after that. No doubt she realized how much I was biting my tongue. Life just wasn't fair. Our household dragged along for the next few weeks. I contacted a lawyer who painted a gloomy picture of what my future held. The good news was there was a decent chance I wouldn't have to pay any alimony. Paige earned a decent salary, but not as much as I did. My lawyer was optimistic that the fact she was the one who cheated would convince a reasonable judge that child support for our 2 children was sufficient. While it was still a considerable amount of money, it wasn't just about dollars and cents for me. It was about some sort of justice. Paying alimony to a wife who cheated felt like rubbing salt in a very open and painful wound. It felt like rewarding bad behavior. If I had my way, she would be paying me. With good news comes bad. My lawyer explained that in order to even be considered for a divorce, we would have to be separated for a year. That meant living in 2 separate residences, which would keep us stuck in this limbo for another 12 months. So, he drew up a separation agreement instead of a divorce decree. There was some discussion between Paige, my lawyer, and myself about the terms. We settled on a fair payment amount relatively quickly, but other details made the conversation heated. The disagreements were mostly about what we were and weren't allowed to do during this time. Yep, you guessed it. She wanted to be able to date. After much debate, we settled on what was fair. She had the right to a single life, but I had the right to request that she keep her new relationships away from the kids. She agreed and quickly signed the papers. Once our names were on the dotted lines, I found a reasonably priced apartment and moved out within 2 weeks. It took us over a decade to build a life together, and only half a month to undo it. That hit the kids hard. Paige and I tried our best to reiterate to them that they weren't losing me as a parent. Their pleas for us to go back to being a happy family were heartbreaking. I almost felt sorry for Paige. Almost, but not quite. The guilt written on her face as she watched the kids cry and beg was enough to make me believe there was still a piece of the woman I married buried in there. She wasn't completely lost. After moving out, life was bleak for me. Coming home to an empty apartment was a daily reminder of how low things had become. It got to the point that I created work to do just so I could stay at the office longer. One day, while sitting in my apartment watching my small TV, I saw a commercial for the gym that Phil recommended. The ad highlighted their judgment-free atmosphere, showing people of all shapes working out with smiles on their faces and showcasing various amenities like fitness classes and a spa. I fished through my wallet and pulled out the card for the gym that Phil had given me. I Googled the gym to see if I could find reviews. I found dozens of favorable comments praising the courteous staff, updated workout equipment, and the new spa room that had just been built. There were a few comments about particular staff members. For instance, a woman named Naomi seemed to have a small fan club, with raving reviews about how inspirational she was and how she always went out of her way to help members. I remembered that name from my conversation with Phil. Curiosity piqued, I thought, what the hell? As I grabbed my keys. I didn't have anything else to do but wallow around in this apartment, so why not check it out? The gym was only about 10 minutes away. When I stepped inside, I instantly became self-conscious. There were people in various stages of working out, many of them glistening with perspiration. As I looked around, I noticed that everyone I saw seemed to fit a particular mold. There were the men who lifted weights, grunting as they stood in front of the mirrors, and the women who moved gracefully on the treadmills with their bouncy ponytails and toned legs. A quick glance down at my protruding belly reminded me that I was in the wrong place. I was getting ready to walk out when a pleasant voice interrupted me. "Can I help you?" I turned to see a young woman behind the reception desk. She resembled the other women I had seen, making me feel even more self-conscious. Great. She probably thinks I'm out of place, I thought. "Oh, no, I was just looking around, thanks," I replied quickly, turning to shuffle out the door. "If you really want to look around, you should take a tour. We have plenty to offer," she said, hurrying to stop me before I left. I'm okay. I just think I'm in the wrong place, I said. She nodded knowingly. I think you'd be surprised, she insisted. Before I could turn her down again, she added, just take a quick walk with me and look around. If you still feel that you're in the wrong place, I'll let you go. I didn't say yes, but I also didn't say no. She must have taken this as a good sign because she came around the desk and looked at me expectantly. I didn't have the heart to say no. I know I'm a bit of a coward, but it's nearly impossible to turn down someone as friendly as her. Okay, you win, I said in surrender. Awesome, she said brightly. By the way, I'm Naomi, the manager here. And you are? Arthur, I answered, shaking her hand. Intriguing name. Like King Arthur? She asked with interest. I smiled and nodded. At least that's what my parents had in mind when they named me. She laughed, a pleasant sound that made me smile even more. Well, Your Highness, wait here for a second. I have to get someone to cover the desk while we walk around. I'll be right with you. As she walked away, I couldn't help but admire her confidence. She returned a few minutes later with another girl in tow. The other girl smiled at me as she went behind the desk, and Naomi cheerily said, You ready to go, Arthur? I followed her on the tour as she showed me around the gym, highlighting features similar to those in the commercial. While it wasn't anything new, having her guide the tour made it more enjoyable. The real game changer came when we reached a section of the gym with a wall filled with photos, a large collage of before and after shots of various people. Can I tell you a secret? Naomi asked, turning to me. I nodded, curious. She pointed to one of the photos and said, This was me when I first joined the gym. I couldn't stop my jaw from dropping. The picture showed Naomi standing with another man and a young boy, a family photo. The stunning revelation was that the Naomi in that picture looked to be at least 200 pounds heavier. The aftershot beside it was astonishing. She looked like a completely different person. When I got pregnant with Henry, she said, pointing to the small boy in the before picture, I gained a lot of weight. It didn't go away after I had him. Then one Christmas, my husband bought me a treadmill. She said the word treadmill as if it were something rather burdensome. He was trying to be sweet, but all I saw was a woman who needed to lose weight. I took stock of myself and realized that who I was wasn't who I wanted to be. That's when I decided to take action. I came to this gym with my brother-in-law, who was a trainer here at the time. With his help, I lost over 75 pounds. Wow, was all I could say. Naomi smiled. So you see, Arthur, you shouldn't feel out of place here. We all have different body shapes, just like we all have different reasons for wanting to be healthy. Many of the people you see here started where you are now. You're here because you belong. Who knows? Maybe your picture will be up here someday. So, I signed up for a membership. What can I say? She was a good saleswoman. I received a pamphlet outlining the various classes and programs the gym offered, along with a t-shirt. I enrolled in the starter program, which was held twice a week for 2 weeks. One of the trainers showed me how to use the equipment and explained which exercises worked which muscles. He also provided tips on maximizing the efficiency of my workouts. After that, I signed up for one-on-one sessions with a trainer named Manny every Wednesday at 8 o'clock. He asked what I wanted to achieve by coming to the gym and designed a routine to help me reach those goals. I also started attending various classes. Some I went to religiously, while others were just to see if I liked them. The biking class on Thursdays quickly became my favorite. The yoga class sounded appealing at first, with images of women in yoga pants doing stretches, but the reality wasn't as enjoyable as I had anticipated. An unexpected benefit from these classes was that I met people like me. It seemed we were all on similar journeys and had much in common. Meanwhile, things with my estranged wife, Paige, seemed to worsen. One evening, I visited my former home to see the kids. I still had a key, so it was easy to walk in. When I arrived, I found Paige's niece watching the kids. When I asked where Paige was, the niece became nervous. Putting 2 and 2 together, I deduced that she was out with a guy, probably Derek. Needless to say, I wasn't thrilled about sticking around. I hadn't come there to see her, but learning that she was out with someone else hit hard. However, I stayed because I wanted my kids to see that I was still in their lives. I paid the niece and sent her home. Paige arrived around 11 that evening, nearly startled to see me sitting on the couch. "Artie, what are you doing here?" she exclaimed. She looked beautiful in her short black cocktail dress, which accentuated her figure. However, her hair wasn't neatly done, and her makeup had faded, suggesting that she had spent her night elsewhere. I swallowed hard. I just came over to see the kids. I figured that since I was here, there was no reason for Penny to stay, so I paid her. If I'd known how late you'd be, I wouldn't have sent her home, she replied, trying to gauge my mood. I remained emotionless. I wasn't angry, sarcastic, or sad. I felt empty, drained and tired of the pain and rejection. I didn't know you were here watching them. I'm sorry, she said, unable to meet my eyes. I sensed she understood how I felt about her being out, but I wasn't sure if she felt guilty or just sympathetic toward me. In truth, it didn't matter. I shook my head and got up from the couch. No worries, it happens, I said with an unemotional shrug. I walked past her toward the door. I could feel her eyes on me, as if she wanted to say something. I didn't know what could possibly be said, and honestly, I didn't want to hear it. As I grabbed my coat, she finally spoke up. Hey, Artie. I paused, giving her a chance to continue. She stammered, but whatever she wanted to say never came out. Instead, she simply said, Thanks for paying, Penny. No problem. Good night, Paige. I walked out and closed the door behind me. A few months later, I found myself pedaling furiously on the bike machine. My legs were burning and my back was aching, but I wouldn't let those sensations stop me. I was determined to push through until the digital clock counted down to 0. When I finally stepped off the bike, a smile spread across my face as I saw that I had burned 432 calories. I headed to the locker room, feeling a boost of confidence. I had been coming to the gym regularly, and I was starting to feel the difference. After a quick shower, I debated stepping on the scale. Curiosity won out in the end, so I did. What I saw made my heart drop. I had only lost 10 pounds. I should have been happier. I should have celebrated. But instead, disappointment washed over me. After 3 months of hard work, I had expected at least a 20-pound loss. I dressed dejectedly and stormed out. Once again, life felt unfair. It seemed like Paige was skating through life, enjoying her singlehood, while all I had to show for my sweat was 10 pounds. I almost collided with Naomi as I was leaving. She was carrying an armful of towels. Oh, I'm sorry, Arthur. I didn't see you, she said, expertly dodging me. I was impressed that she remembered me, but my mind was elsewhere. No problem, I replied, a bit briskly, and continued to head out. Is everything okay? I heard her call after me, a hint of concern in her voice. I turned to find her jogging up to me. Yeah, I'm good. I don't know. Do you want to talk about it? She asked. Not really. Not much to talk about, I guess. I'm just a little disappointed in myself. I didn't mean to spill everything about my life, but what started as a brief mention of my weight loss turned into a half-hour discussion about Paige, my kids, and even Lance. To her credit, Naomi listened attentively, never looking bored. Wow, that's heavy, she said when I finally paused. After a moment, she asked, What is it that you want, Arthur? It was a simple question, one that should have had a simple answer, but it didn't. The truth was, I hadn't really stopped to think about what I wanted. She saw my indecision and pressed on. Do you want to win your wife back? Do you want to make her jealous? Are you trying to catch up to your brother? What is it that you want? Why are you here? I thought about it for a moment. As ridiculous as it sounded, I kind of wanted all those things, yet at the same time, I didn't really want any of them. I just want to feel good about myself, I admitted truthfully. Well, you won't find that here, she replied, her expression hard to read. I was surprised to hear her say that. People think that coming to the gym and losing a bunch of weight will make them happier or better people, but it doesn't. Trust me, you can work out all day long and lose 100 pounds, but feeling good about yourself comes from within. If it comes from how you look, then it's shallow. That's not real self-esteem. You have to know your worth, no matter how you look. I snorted. Easy for you to say. You look like that. I waved my hand dismissively. Besides, your husband didn't reject you when you gained weight. No, he didn't. He accepted me for who I was, even when I was at my worst. You know what happened, though? I almost threw it all away because I didn't believe I was worth it. I thought my looks were the best thing I had going, and when I lost that, I lost a part of myself. For the first time, I saw her radiant smile fade. Her expression became haunted. Once I started to lose weight, I became more confident, and I noticed the effect I had on the men around me. I felt powerful. What I didn't realize was that was all a facade. The ugliness I buried within myself was still there. I hadn't gotten rid of it. I just covered it up with shallow acts of superiority to prove to myself that I was special. Deep down, I knew the truth. I didn't deserve my husband. I didn't deserve the love he gave me. Her story resonated with me deeply, and I felt as though I was experiencing it alongside her. The emotions of that time came through in her words, captivating me completely. After a while, those feelings began to resurface, and she continued. In order to push them back down, I had to do more things to feel special. Let's just say that in the end, I almost lost my family because I was more focused on outside affirmation than on figuring out why I felt unworthy of my husband. So what am I supposed to do, huh? I don't know anymore. All I know is that I'm lonely. I'm working late and hanging out at the gym because I don't want to go home. At the end of the day, it all boils down to one fact. My wife doesn't want me. How do you feel good about yourself when the one person you love doesn't care about you? She looked at me thoughtfully, then said, "Wait here, Arthur. I'll be right back." She jogged off toward a staff area and returned with a card. "Tomorrow, I want you to call this guy. His name is Jerry. He's my brother-in-law, the one I told you about. He trained me when he was a trainer here. Now he's a personal trainer and life coach. He doesn't come cheap, but luckily for you, he has a soft spot for me. We are family, after all. I'll talk to him tonight to see if there's anything he can do for you. You and he can discuss the rest when you call." I took the card and looked at it. "Wow, thanks. I don't know what to say," I said, genuinely appreciative. She shrugged, as if it were nothing. "Don't worry about it. I know what it's like to just need someone to care. We've all been there. Just do me one small favor." "What's that?" "If I convince Jerry to take you on as a client, give him your all. Don't go into it half-heartedly. I'm calling in a favor he owes me, so please make it worth it." I was touched that she would do all of this for someone she barely knew. "Why are you doing this for me?" I asked, slightly skeptical. She cocked her head to the side, considering me. "Because despite what your wife thinks, I do believe you're worth the trouble. I see you in here working out. I see how you interact with others. You're a hard worker, but you're also kind, courteous, and a real gentleman. You open doors for ladies, and you don't look at them inappropriately. I've met my fair share of creeps, trust me. I know a good guy when I see one." Her words really touched me. As a man struggling with my wife's rejection, hearing another woman acknowledge my good qualities felt therapeutic. Without realizing it, I hugged her. She was surprised at first and let out a small, "oh," when I grabbed her, but then she returned the gesture with a friendly pat on the back. When I let go, she said, "You're going to be okay. For what it's worth, your wife lost out big." She patted my cheek and smiled. "Good luck, King Arthur." Then she walked off. I met Jerry a week later. He looked different than I had imagined. Physically, he resembled Lance, but he was more toned and defined. I felt a mix of envy and intimidation, but his personality was nothing like I expected. Half of me anticipated him to be comforting and nurturing like Naomi, while the other half expected him to be cocky and self-absorbed, as I associated with trainers. Well, you know what they say about assumptions. He was so professional that he was almost cold. When we spoke on the phone, Jerry mentioned he had discussed taking me on as a client with Naomi. He wanted to know more about me before moving forward and suggested we set up a face-to-face meeting at my apartment. I found that a bit strange. I would have thought he'd prefer a neutral location or maybe even an office, but he apparently had other ideas. When he arrived and introduced himself, he made himself at home, literally. He walked around as if he had full rights to explore my space, peeking into my kitchen, checking my cabinets and fridge, and even opening my medicine cabinet in the bathroom. He wandered into my bedroom and glanced under the bed. Then he asked a series of personal questions about my eating habits, my TV preferences, my work schedule, and even the last time I had been intimate with someone. After that, he sat me down. "Okay, Arthur, I've decided to take you on as a client. I have to admit that the only reason I'm doing this is because my sister-in-law made a compelling case for you, and I owe her a favor. She often lets me use her gym for free to entertain clients, so the least I can do is take on a client or two pro bono. Wow, that would be great. Thank you, I replied. He laughed and shook his head. Don't thank me yet, King Arthur, he said in a sarcastic tone, clearly aware of Naomi's nickname for me. He likely disagreed with the notion that I deserved it. If we get through the first couple of weeks without you quitting, I'll be surprised. That doesn't sound very encouraging, I said, feeling a bit taken aback. He chuckled. I wasn't trying to encourage you, Your Highness. I was warning you. You see, I find that people who pay for something do so because they really want it. If they get it for free, it loses value and they feel entitled to it. My clients pay a lot for my services because they genuinely want to change. Well, you're getting the Naomi discount. I don't know how motivated you are, but we'll find out soon enough. I own you now. Your body belongs to me. You'll do what I say, when I say it, no questions asked. The first time you talk back, disobey, or refuse me, we're done. Got it? Yeah, got it, I replied, feeling a bit miffed by his smug attitude. If he noticed my reaction, he didn't let it show. Good. Now, do you have any vacation time coming up? Can you take a week off? I nodded. He pulled out his phone and did a couple of things on it. Do that. Take a week off from work and let me know the dates. Then I want you to eat anything and everything you think you'll miss. Do it before that week. Enjoy yourself. Once we get started, things will change big time. With that cryptic message, he left. A real piece of work, I thought as I closed the door behind him. I wish I had heeded Jerry's warning more carefully. To say that he was intense would be an understatement. On the very first day of my vacation, I met with a nutritionist, a pleasant-looking woman who probably weighed about 100 pounds. I spent an entire day with her going over how the body breaks down food. It sounded like something you'd learn in a decent nutrition class, but it was more focused on weight loss. We discussed eating habits, specifically how to eat. She showed me what to look for on food labels, how to count my daily calorie intake, the best sources for protein and vitamins, and what constituted a balanced meal. It was a pretty eye-opening day. By the time I finished with her, I realized a few things about how I viewed food. In short, I had been eating for pleasure rather than for fuel. If I was bored, I ate. If I craved something, I indulged, regardless of whether I was hungry. If the food tasted good, I continued to eat it until it was gone. The next day, Jerry took me grocery shopping, and let me tell you, there is nothing more disheartening than realizing that 90% of the grocery store was off limits to me. Even items I thought were healthy weren't allowed. He wouldn't let me buy diet sodas, microwavable meals, even if they were low-calorie, or any type of bread, not even whole grain. The next phase involved going through a bunch of cookbooks and learning how to prepare meals. I wasn't allowed to eat anything that I didn't cook on the stove. In fact, he said I could only use the microwave for reheating food. This meant that anything going into the microwave had to be previously cooked by me using ingredients I prepared. I spent the entire time off from work feeling perpetually hungry. It felt like I was going to starve. The meals I made were either inedible or just plain unappetizing. I suffered through them, forcing down what I could manage. I had to stay away from TV, as the commercials were the worst. I didn't realize how many commercials featured food. It was torture. A funny thing happened, though. I started to pay more attention to the cookbooks, looked up recipes online, and even watched cooking shows on TV. Eventually, I discovered meals that were within my skill set to make. Was I a chef? Absolutely not. But before the week was up, I was able to prepare meals that were decent enough to eat. They may not have been gourmet, but at least I wasn't on the verge of starvation. The celebration of that small victory was short-lived because that's when the workouts began. Unlike the casual workouts I did before, these were designed to really challenge me. Jerry went with me to the gym twice a week after I got off work, and we worked out for 2 hours. I spent 30 minutes on the treadmill for a warm-up, then we hit the weights for an hour. The last 30 minutes were spent in the stretching area to cool down. On top of our 2 sessions a week, he insisted that I work out at least 2 more days. It didn't have to be at the gym. Any activity that got my heart rate up would count. He warned me he'd be keeping an eye out to ensure I didn't lie about it. He could do spot checks at any time. He even made it clear that sex didn't count as physical activity. I couldn't tell if he was joking, but when I playfully said that wouldn't be a problem, he didn't laugh. No sense of humor, I guess. So, on top of always feeling hungry, I was exhausted. My entire body ached constantly. It became difficult to walk or lift things. All I wanted to do when I got home was stay in bed, but even that wasn't possible. I was a father and needed to make time for the kids whenever I could. I didn't want to disappear from their lives, so I had to push through. I was grateful that Paige went out of her way to help me spend time with them. She didn't object to my dropping by the house, even if it was unexpected. Part of her graciousness might have stemmed from guilt, but I felt she genuinely wanted what was best for the kids. They needed me to be a constant presence in their lives, and she was more than accommodating. She even insisted that I keep a house key, implying that I should respect her privacy. This is where I admit that I didn't always uphold my end of that unspoken agreement. I am not proud of it, but I fell victim to the green-eyed monster of jealousy. It started out as innocent curiosity. I found myself snooping around when I thought there was little risk of getting caught. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just trying to get a sense of how things were going in my absence. The first thing that struck me as odd was the unfamiliar toothbrush in the master bathroom. I didn't think much of it at first, but when I saw men's body wash in the shower, I began to feel uneasy. I didn't find any men's clothes in her closet, but I did notice a pair of boxer shorts in her laundry basket. I can't explain the rush of emotions that hit me as I stared at another man's underwear alongside my wife's lingerie. It felt like a violation. This guy was intruding further into my space and marking it as his own. I swallowed my anger. No matter what I discovered when Paige wasn't looking, I pretended that nothing was wrong. I wanted to gather more information without her knowing I was snooping. Plus, plain old pride kept me from confronting her. I wanted to appear detached, as if nothing she did bothered me. I questioned my kids about any unusual visitors lately, but they didn't seem to understand what I was asking, so I had to assume that Paige was keeping things from them. Most likely, any new activities happened while the kids were at school or during playdates, which made it easier for her to keep things hidden. As much as I tried to mask my hurt, I wasn't sure Paige was convinced. It's nearly impossible to hide pain for long. There were moments when she caught me looking at her with an apologetic expression, as if she could sense my turmoil. Watching her move forward so effortlessly while I remained stuck in a quagmire of regret was painful. The workouts with Jerry helped a lot. Listening to him bark instructions at me while I struggled with the bench press, or doing sit-ups distracted me from thoughts of Paige. His teasing about my nickname focused my negative energy away from my problems. Outside of that, I went to work and did my job. Like many men in my situation, my office became a refuge. There, I felt valued. I think that's why men often throw themselves into their jobs when their marriages fail. At work, you're judged by your performance. There's a clear, quantitative measure of how well you're doing. If the numbers are good, you're praised. If they're not, you're reprimanded. When there's a problem, you simply find it, eliminate it, and replace the missing component with something better. If only marriages could be resolved so easily. The story continues in the next video. Link to part 2 in the description of this video. Thank you for watching and for your likes.